I think it's outrageous. I do not understand what the Trump administration's strategy is in terms of negotiating with the Russians. I've negotiated with the Russians and Mr. Putin. They're tough negotiators. They're difficult negotiators. They're not going to give up anything for free. And yet, at least in the first week of negotiations that happened last week, starting in Munich and then in Saudi Arabia, the American side just gave Putin everything he wanted.
Now, let's just go back to the House of Commons, where the Foreign Secretary David Lammy has been speaking to MPs, announcing those fresh sanctions on Russia. Let's have a listen to what he's been saying.
The UK also continues to set the pace on ratcheting up the economic pressure on the Kremlin. Together with our international partners, we have already denied Russia access to $400 billion. Their war economy is increasingly unsustainable. Inflation is 9.9% and rising. That's just the official figure, of course. Interest rates are running at 21%. And this year, Russia will spend almost 41% of its budget on defense and security. Today, Mr. Speaker, we're announcing our biggest package of sanctions since the early days of the war. Over 100 targets, including 40 oil tankers, our largest set of ship specifications in a single sanctions package yet, as well as third country enablers pouring money into Putin's war chest, and new legislation imposing additional trade sanctions on Russia too. This will deny Russia access to world-leading expertise needed to maintain its war.
Steve, Foreign Secretary David Lammy speaking in the House of Commons just a very short while ago. Now, let's say good afternoon and welcome to Michael McFaul, who's a former United States ambassador to Russia under the Obama administration. Hello to you, Michael.
Hello, thanks for having me.
You're very, very welcome. So we're just listening there to the British Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, spelling out more sanctions against Russia and also making the point that Russia's position has not and is not especially strong now. The Russian economy has been feeling the weight of those sanctions, has been feeling the weight of waging this war against Ukraine. With all of that in mind, is it odd to you that the president has, well, offered these concessions, given so much ground to Russia, to Vladimir Putin, without seeking, it seems, much at all in return?
Odd is a very generous word. I think it's appalling. I think it's outrageous. I do not understand what the Trump administration's strategy is in terms of negotiating with the Russians. I've negotiated with the Russians and Mr. Putin. They're tough negotiators. They're difficult negotiators. They're not going to give up anything for free. And yet, at least in the first week of negotiations that happened last week, starting in Munich and then in Saudi Arabia, the American side just gave Putin everything he wanted. They said, Mr. Zelensky, you have to give up territory. Your country can't join NATO. If there's peacekeeping forces in your country, America won't participate. We're going to withdraw. Oh, by the way, Zelensky, you have to give us $500 billion to pay for the aid we gave you before. And nothing, absolutely nothing, was asked of the Russian side. So I hope this was just because they're new at this. Secretary Rubio's been at it for 3 weeks. Lavrov's been at it for 2 decades. I fear, however, that Trump is not really serious about a deal, that all he really wants is to establish relations with Russia again, and whether or not they get an actual enduring and binding agreement with Ukraine is of secondary importance to him.
Right, okay, it's a pretty dark analysis, and this is a recurring question. The puzzlement you expressed there at Donald Trump's apparent willingness to give concessions to Russia is echoed in so many conversations that we have just at the moment. Have you an explanation for it? Is it, I don't know, an affinity between a president who likes to see himself as a strongman leader with another strongman in Russia, maybe having a certain amount in common in their attitudes, that sort of social conservatism, that anti-wokeness? I mean, how do you analyze it, even if you're speculating to yourself?
I think what you're just describing is exactly right. That is, there is an ideological affinity between these two gentlemen. For years here in my country, we've been speculating about other things, some kind of blackmail, et cetera. And who knows, maybe that'll be proven in the future. But I think this ideological affinity is where it all starts. Both of these guys are populist nationalists, illiberal populists. against multilateralism, against woke values. Putin especially has gone on and on for years against liberalism, especially European liberalism. He called it once gay Europa. Maybe he didn't, but somebody around him. And Trump shares this ideological view. And by the way, there are lots of movements and parties in Europe that do as well, as I'm sure you know better than I do, including in your country. So this is a transnational movement based on ideology. But I want to be clear, it's not in the interest of my country at all. This does not make Trump look strong. I think it makes him look extremely weak. Just to give Putin everything he wants and offer nothing in return, that Putin interprets that as a sign of weakness, not strength. And second, my country, and I hope other liberal democracies in the world, we have a national security interest in not rewarding imperial conquest, not rewarding annexation. After all, that's why we fought World War II, was to stop those kinds of activities. And for decades, even during the Cold War, we didn't have much of it. Putin is now doing it again. And tragically, the president of the United States is saying it's okay.
Okay, one more question, if I may, Ambassador. And given all you said so far, I'm not anticipating anything very optimistic in your answer. But we're in about, less than an hour's time, we are expected to hear from President Trump and Emmanuel Macron of France together in the White House. And later on, our Prime Minister, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, is going to be in Washington on Thursday. Do you think it's possible, remotely likely, that President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer might coax Donald Trump closer to Europe's side in seeking that American support for Ukraine and for European defense?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think this is very important because, here in the United States, we are not a monarchy. We are not a dictatorship. Trump has his views, but 80% of the American people don't agree with them. 80% of the American people, by the way, we don't get many polls where we have 80% on one side. I don't know how it is in Britain these days. That's an extraordinary number. Do not trust Putin. Only 9% support Putin. And I think there are lots of Americans who don't support this, lots of our allies who don't. By the way, Putin is not winning in Ukraine. After 3 years of fighting, he's barely conquered much more territory than he had 3 years ago, and a cost of 1 million casualties. So I think this is a fluid situation, and I'm very pleased that your prime minister is coming to my country this week.
Okay, fascinating to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much. Michael McFaul, the former United States ambassador to Russia.